Hello, and a huge welcome to the channel. If you're looking for cross-dressing stories that are emotional, intriguing, and truly empowering, you've come to the right place. Amelia. What's happening to my body? My chest. Is it really growing? You never think it's going to be you. You read the safety manuals. You sit through the tedious annual briefings. You even initial the little checkboxes on the lab's digital forms. You do it all with the detached air of a professional who knows the real dangers aren't in the carefully controlled protocols, but in the chaotic variables of the universe itself. The real danger, you tell yourself, is out there, not in here, not with you. Until it is. The lab was my sanctuary, a place of clean lines and predictable outcomes. The air hummed with the steady thrum of the centrifugal machines. A sound I found more comforting than any music. It smelled of isopropyl alcohol and sterile latex, a scent that meant order and control. On that particular Tuesday, the overhead fluorescent lights cast everything in a cold, white glow, bleaching the color from the world and leaving only the stark reality of the work in front of me. I was handling ES8, Project Chimera's crown jewel, a synthetic estrogen so potent, so unbelievably efficient, that it made naturally occurring hormones look like clumsy, primitive tools. Our goal was simple, if ethically complex. We were designing a compound that could trigger rapid cellular regeneration and adaptation, a key to everything from advanced burn treatments to, theoretically, mitigating the effects of aging. ES8 was the 8th iteration, and it was a masterpiece of biochemical engineering. It was also, as I was about to discover, terrifyingly effective. I was in the final stages of purifying a new batch. My hands, sheathed in thick nitrile gloves, moved with an economy born of a decade spent in this very room. Pipette, beaker, magnetic stirrer. The rhythm was a meditation. But science, like life, is full of small, unseen pressures. A microfracture in the borosilicate glass. A result of a thermal reaction I hadn't anticipated. It was an infinitesimal flaw. A crack no bigger than a hairline, but it was enough. Weston, watch out. Amelia's voice sliced through my concentration. I looked up, saw her eyes widen in panic from across the lab, and then I looked down. The beaker in my hand was frosting over, a web of crystalline cracks spreading across its surface. The liquid inside, a clear and unassuming fluid, was beginning to bubble. I didn't even have time to curse. The crack wasn't a leak, it was a detonation. The glass gave way with a sharp pop, and the world dissolved into a spray of liquid and a sensation of profound, shocking cold. The ES8 compound atomized, blanketing my face, my neck, my arms, anywhere my lab coat hadn't covered. It didn't burn. It was worse. It felt like 10,000 tiny needles, each one tipped with ice, plunging into my skin. A paralytic numbness followed, spreading from my cheeks down to my collarbone. My first coherent thought wasn't about the danger, but a stupid, mundane observation: it doesn't even have a smell. Then the chaos erupted. The airborne particulate alarm shrieked, a piercing cyclical wail that vibrated in my teeth. Red lights began to flash, painting the sterile white lab in demonic pulses. Amelia was at my side in an instant, her hands, protected by her own gloves, grabbing my arm and yanking me toward the emergency decontamination shower. "Don't breathe in, Weston. Hold your breath," she yelled over the alarm. The water was brutally cold, a deluge that hit me like a physical blow. It plastered my hair to my skull and sluiced the chemical off my skin. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The tingling hadn't stopped. It felt like it had burrowed deep beneath the surface, a million tiny engines revving to life in my cells. I stood there under the punishing spray, shaking uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from the terrifying, intimate knowledge that a profound and irreversible boundary had just been crossed. Something had gotten in. The next morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal. It's what we do, isn't it? We compartmentalize. The accident was an industrial mishap. I was given a clean bill of health after a 3-hour observation period. The tingling had subsided. Life would go on. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, lathering shaving cream onto my face. That's when I noticed the first anomaly. My skin. It was smooth. Not just clean-shaven smooth, but poreless. Soft. Like I'd just spent a week at a spa I couldn't afford. I ran the back of my hand over my cheek. There was a suppleness to it that hadn't been there yesterday. I leaned closer, examining the reflection. The Western staring back at me looked younger, less tired. The faint lines around my eyes seemed to have softened. It's just a temporary reaction, I told myself, my voice of reason sounding a little too loud in my head. A histamine response. It'll fade. I went to call out to Amelia. She had insisted on staying the night on my couch to monitor me, and the second anomaly hit. Hey, Ames, you want coffee? My own voice startled me. The words came out gravelly with sleep, as they always did, but there was something else. A higher pitch at the tail end of the sentence. A slight, almost melodic lift that I didn't recognize. It sounded less like a question and more like an invitation. I cleared my throat, feeling a flush of heat crawl up my neck. I tried again, forcing my voice into its usual register. Coffee, I asked the empty hallway, the single word sounding clipped and artificial. This was a mistake. My scientific mind, the part of me that catalogues and analyzes every deviation from the baseline, was now on high alert. I quickly dressed for work, pulling on my standard uniform, a crisp Oxford shirt and a pair of tailored slacks. But they felt wrong. The shirt, which usually fits snugly across my shoulders and chest, felt loose, as if the fabric was pooling around my collarbones. Stranger still. The slacks were uncomfortably tight around my hips and seat. I had to tug to get the button fastened. It was a subtle change, the kind you might attribute to a faulty washing machine cycle. But I knew better. My body's geometry was shifting. No, it's impossible, I thought, staring at my reflection again. This time fully dressed. The compound can't have been absorbed that quickly. It's just paranoia, a psychosomatic response to the trauma. But the man in the mirror looked different. The clothes hung on him differently. And deep in my gut, a cold dread began to spread. This was not a temporary reaction. This was the beginning. Amelia was already in the lab when I arrived, a tablet in her hand and a grim expression on her face. She looked up, and her eyes did a quick, professional sweep over me. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Fine," I lied, a little shaken up, ready to file about 50 incident reports. She didn't smile. "I ran your blood work from last night. The preliminary results just came in." She turned the tablet toward me. It was a chaotic jumble of charts and numbers, but my eyes immediately found the relevant data points. Testosterone plummeting, estrogen skyrocketing to levels that would be high for a woman in her 3rd trimester. My breath hitched. This is a mistake. The sample must be contaminated. "It's not," she said softly. "I ran it 3 times. Weston, the ES8, it must have permeated the epidermis. We designed it to be fast-acting, to bond with cellular receptors on contact. We just never tested this kind of contact, not on a living, breathing person." I sank into a lab stool, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum. The humming of the machines suddenly felt oppressive. So what does this mean? Hormone therapy. I'll be back to normal in a few months. Amelia hesitated, and in that small pause, my world fractured. She was the most brilliant biochemist I knew. But right now, she wasn't looking at me like a colleague. She was looking at me with pity. "We don't have a normal to go back to," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "ES8 doesn't just introduce hormones, Weston. It rewrites the body's instructions for using them. It's a catalyst. If it's already bonded with your system on a cellular level, Weston, your body is going to restructure itself. It will follow the new blueprint it's been given." I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the words. Restructure, blueprint. It was the detached, clinical language of a scientist, but the implications were deeply, horrifyingly personal. I don't accept that, I said. Standing up. My voice was colder. Sharper than I intended. It was the defensive shield of a man who felt the ground crumbling beneath his feet. It's a chemical imbalance. We can counteract it. We'll synthesize an anti-agent. We can try. Amelia agreed, though her tone lacked any real conviction. But we need to be realistic. We're in completely uncharted territory. I turned away from her, unable to look at the sympathy in her eyes. I ran a hand through my hair, and my fingers registered another change. The texture felt softer, finer. I clenched my fist, the knuckles feeling strangely delicate. Inside me, a storm of anxiety was raging, a hurricane of fear and denial. But on the outside, I was a scientist. I would observe. I would analyze. I would solve the problem. I had to. It was the only way I knew how to survive. The first time it happened, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I was reaching for a beaker on a high shelf, and the sleeve of my lab coat brushed against my chest. A sharp, stinging pain shot through me, so intense it made me gasp. It felt like a bad sunburn, but deep inside the muscle, I instinctively put a hand to my chest, my fingers pressing against the hard plane of my pectoral muscle through the cotton of my shirt. There was a tender, swollen knot of tissue there. Right under the nipple, it ached with a dull, persistent throb. Throughout the day, the sensations multiplied. My skin became exquisitely sensitive. I could feel the starchy texture of my shirt collar against the back of my neck, the rough seam of my trousers against my thigh. Every touch was amplified, every fabric a source of potential irritation. It was like my body's volume knob had been turned all the way up. That night, lying in bed, the feeling was undeniable. The simple pressure of the bedsheet on my chest was agonizing. I rolled onto my side, trying to find a position that didn't cause that hot, sharp ache. I closed my eyes and focused on the sensation. No, it wasn't just pain. It was a feeling of activity, of growth. It felt like something was blooming under my skin. A slow, insistent pressure, pushing outward. It was a quiet, internal process, but it was as real and tangible as the beat of my own heart. I lay there in the dark, sweating, one hand hovering protectively over my chest. The scientist in me wanted to document it, to name the process. But the man the Western I had always been was terrified. Something inside me was waking up, and I had no idea who or what it was going to be. With every breath, I felt a faint, rhythmic pulse of pain in my chest. I thought back to the hook I had imagined opening this story with. The line I would one day say to Amelia. It wasn't a hook, it was a prophecy. Amelia, I whispered to the empty room, testing the words. I think my chest is hurting with every breath. And it was. It truly was. The first week was denial. The second was a quiet, creeping dread. By the third, there was no room for either. There was only the stark, undeniable evidence of my own body, which was methodically and relentlessly betraying the man I had always known. My voice was the most public of the changes. It lost its gravelly morning texture, smoothing out into something softer. I found myself unable to project it in meetings. It would crack and fail me. Defaulting to a higher, breathier register, colleagues started asking if I was coming down with a cold. I just nodded and blamed allergies. But the truth was, my vocal cords were physically changing, shortening, tightening. My own words were becoming foreign in my mouth. Then came the bigger, more structural shifts. I woke up one morning and my favorite pair of trousers, a classic grey flannel I'd had for years, simply wouldn't button. I sucked in my stomach. I pulled. I swore. It was no use. My hips had widened, just by an inch or so, but enough to render my entire wardrobe obsolete. At the same time, My waist seemed to be cinching inward. I caught a glimpse of my silhouette in a shop window and did a double take, stripped of my baggy lab coat. My body was beginning to take on a shape I'd only ever seen on women, an hourglass. A distorted, masculine version of one. But the gentle curve from waist to hip was there. It was horrifying. It was fascinating. The most intimate and alarming change was my chest. The initial tenderness had evolved into a constant, dull ache. The small knots of tissue had grown, swelling into soft, sensitive mounds. They were unmistakable now. They were breasts, small, but undeniably present. They strained against the fabric of my undershirts and were agonizingly sensitive to any accidental bump or brush. I started walking with my arms crossed over my chest, a defensive posture that did little to hide the truth. I became a stranger in my own skin. I'd catch my reflection and not recognize the person staring back. The jawline was a little softer, the fat distribution in my face shifting to create fuller cheeks, wider eyes. My body hair thinned, the wiry hair on my arms and chest becoming fine and almost translucent. I was being unwritten, erased from the inside out. Dressing for work became a daily exercise in misery. My male clothing, once a source of comfort and identity, now felt like a costume, and a poorly fitting one at that. My Oxford shirts were the worst. The starched cotton, once a symbol of professionalism, now felt abrasive against my hypersensitive skin. The buttons strained across my newly swelling ass and chest, creating an awkward, revealing pucker in the fabric. I took to wearing looser shirts, but that only made it look like I was hiding something, which, of course, I was. The tie, that ultimate symbol of masculine formality, felt like a noose. I'd cinch it in the morning, and by midday, I'd be gasping for air, my throat feeling constricted. My breathing had become shallower, more centered in my chest than my diaphragm, and the pressure of the knot was unbearable. I started loosening it in my office, a small act of rebellion against the uniform that was suffocating me. Even my shoes felt wrong. My feet had somehow become narrower, my arches higher. My expensive leather dress shoes now felt like clumsy boats. My gait, once confident and sure-footed, became hesitant. I felt unsteady, disconnected from the ground beneath me. I was constantly aware of my own body in a way I never had been before. I could feel the way my softened hips swayed slightly when I walked, a movement I couldn't control. I could feel the brush of my thighs against each other, the skin there now smooth and sensitive. I became a connoisseur of tactile sensations. I could tell you the difference between the harsh scrape of wool trousers and the slightly more forgiving slide of a cotton polyester blend. I could feel every seam, every tag, every point of friction where the architecture of my clothes fought against the new architecture of my body. It was a constant, low-level torture. One afternoon, sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a data spreadsheet, the feeling became overwhelming. The waistband of my pants was digging into my soft abdomen. The collar of my shirt was chafing my neck, and the fabric across my chest felt like sandpaper. A thought, unbidden and shocking, surfaced in my mind. My body, it doesn't want these things anymore. It was the first time I had thought of my body as a separate entity, something with its own desires and aversions, and its desires were in direct opposition to everything I, Western, had ever been. My life split in two. There was the Western who went to the lab every day, who tried to project an aura of calm authority, who spoke about a hypothetical anti-agent with a confidence he did not feel. Then there was the man who went home at night, locked the door, and became a meticulous observer of his own dissolution. The scientist in me couldn't help but be intrigued. It was, after all, the most unprecedented biological event in human history, and I was its sole subject. I started a new journal, a private one, locked away on a password-protected file on my personal computer. I documented everything. Day 21 waist measurement has decreased by a full inch. Hip measurement has increased by 1.5 inches. Subject's center of gravity is noticeably lower. Day 28. Lactiferous ducts are becoming more pronounced. Chest circumference now 38 inches, an increase of 2 inches. extreme sensitivity to cold and tactile pressure. Day 35. Voice analysis shows a sustained pitch increase of 15 Hz. Involuntary upward inflection at the end of declarative sentences is now common. I wrote these entries in the sterile, third-person language of a research paper. It was a way to create distance, to treat my own body as a specimen under a microscope. It was a coping mechanism. But the shame was always there, a thick, cloying emotion that clung to me like a damp coat. I was a man with breasts. I was a scientist whose voice cracked like a teenage boy's. I was a freak. The curiosity and the shame were in a constant, brutal war. One part of me wanted to see it through, to see what my body would become. The other part wanted to curl up in a ball and disappear, to stop the relentless march of these changes before they consumed me completely. I avoided mirrors. I showered with the lights off. I pulled the sheets up to my chin at night. I did everything I could to avoid confronting the physical reality of my new form. But you can't run from your own body. It's with you every second of every day. And mine was screaming at me, changing me, and pulling me toward a future I couldn't begin to imagine. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It had been nearly 2 months since the accident. I came home from the lab, exhausted and demoralized. Amelia and I had hit another dead end with the anti-agent. Every compound we formulated was neutralized by the ES8 in my system. It was like trying to put out a chemical fire with gasoline. I peeled off my work clothes, the fabric clinging unpleasantly to my skin, and walked into my closet to find something comfortable to wear, a simple t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. That's all I wanted. I pulled on a t-shirt. It was so tight across my chest that the soft mounds were clearly, sharply defined. I ripped it off. I tried another. Same thing. I moved to my sweatpants. My last refuge of comfort. I couldn't get them up over my hips. I tried every pair I owned. None of them fit. Panic, cold, and sharp, seized me. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, surrounded by a wardrobe that no longer belonged to me, and I was, for all intents and purposes, naked and without shelter. I walked numbly to the full-length mirror on the back of my closet door, the one I had been so diligently avoiding. And I made myself look. The person staring back at me was a paradox, a monster of myth. From the neck up, it was still mostly Western, a softer, prettier version, but Western nonetheless. Below that, it was someone else entirely. The shoulders were still relatively broad, but they sloped now into a torso that was undeniably feminine, a narrow waist, flaring hips, and a pair of small, perfectly shaped breasts. My legs were long and smooth, the muscles leaner, less bulky. It was a body caught between two worlds, a hybrid of male and female that belonged to neither. I saw it, truly saw it for the first time, and a strangled sob escaped my lips. My eyes scanned the closet, desperate for anything at all, that might make sense on this new body, and then I saw it, tucked away in the very back. In a garment bag I hadn't opened in years, was a dress, a silver, sequined flapper dress that belonged to my ex-girlfriend, Chloe. She had left it here after a New Year's Eve party 3 years ago, and I had never gotten around to giving it back. On any other day, I would have slammed the closet door shut. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was broken. My hand trembled as I unzipped the bag. The dress slithered out, a cascade of cool, metallic fabric. I held it up. It shimmered under the bedroom light. Thousands of tiny sequins winking at me. I touched it. The fabric was heavy, but the silk lining was unimaginably soft against my fingertips. I didn't think. I just acted. It was an impulse born of pure desperation. My clothes didn't fit me. My body didn't fit me. Maybe. Just maybe. This would... I pulled the dress over my head. The sensation was electric. The cool, smooth silk slid down my back, over my sensitive skin, in a way that felt less like putting on clothing and more like shedding a skin I no longer needed. The weight of the sequins settled around me. The dress was sleeveless, leaving my arms bare. The neckline was a modest scoop. It settled at my waist, then draped over my hips, and it fit. It didn't just fit. It fit perfectly, horrifyingly, miraculously. Perfectly. The loose, straight cut of the 1920s style didn't cling or bind. It skimmed. It followed the new lines of my body as if it had been tailored for them. The way it hugged my narrow waist and fell gracefully over my wider hips. It made sense. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't feel like a jumble of mismatched parts. In the dress, it looked unified, whole. I stood there, breathless, staring at my reflection. The creature in the mirror was no longer a monster. The broad shoulders were balanced by the drape of the dress. The soft curves were complemented, not hidden. The strange, in-between body was suddenly elegant. "Oh my God," I whispered. My voice came out soft and high. It didn't sound like Weston's voice at all. Why does this feel right? I took a hesitant step. The dress swished around my knees, the sequins making a soft, sibilant sound. I turned, just a slight, experimental pivot. The dress moved with me, a shimmering extension of my own body. A strange, giddy feeling bubbled up in my chest, a feeling so alien I couldn't immediately identify it. It was a flicker of joy. I was a man in a dress. I was a freak. But looking in the mirror, at the way the silver fabric caught the light, at the impossible rightness of it all, I didn't feel like a freak. I felt beautiful. Weston. The voice came from my bedroom doorway. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Amelia was standing there, a paper bag of takeout in one hand, her keys in the other. Her eyes were wide, taking in the scene me, standing in the middle of the room, wearing a glittering silver dress. My first instinct was to cover myself, to hide. A wave of shame so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. My face burned, and I'm sure I turned a shade of red I'd never achieved before. I crossed my arms over my chest, clutching the dress. A useless, panicked gesture. "Amelia, I can explain," I stammered, my new, unreliable voice trembling. She didn't laugh. She didn't look disgusted. She just looked sad and understanding. She slowly closed the door behind her and set the food and her keys on my dresser. She walked toward me, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. "There's nothing to explain." "Weston," she said, her voice gentle. "None of my clothes fit as thin," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. I didn't know what else to do. I was having a meltdown. This was just here. She stopped a few feet in front of me. Her gaze wasn't on the dress, but on my face. She saw the fear in my eyes, the desperation. "It's okay," she said. We both knew this was happening. We were just trying to pretend it wasn't. She gestured at my body, at the dress. This isn't a meltdown. This might be the first logical thing you've done in weeks." I stared at her, confused. Logical aims. I'm a man wearing a cocktail dress. "Are you?" she asked, a genuine question in her voice. "Look at yourself. Your body isn't fighting that dress. It's been fighting everything else. Your shirts, your pants, all of it. Weston, to survive this, maybe you have to stop fighting. Maybe you have to become someone else." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Someone else. It was what I had been terrified of, the very thing I was trying to stop with all my scientific might. But hearing her say it, seeing the compassion in her eyes, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a release. The idea was terrifying. To let go of Weston. To let this transformation run its course. It felt like a death sentence. But who I asked my voice cracking. If I'm not Western while this is happening, who am I? What's my name? The question hung in the air between us. Amelia didn't answer. She just gave me a small, encouraging nod, as if to say, you know the answer. I turned back to the mirror. I looked at the reflection. But this time, I tried to see it through Amelia's eyes. I saw the wide, frightened eyes, the soft line of the jaw, the graceful column of the neck. I saw the way the silver dress made the person in the mirror look both vulnerable and strangely powerful. It wasn't Western anymore. Western was the ghost. The ill-fitting suit I had been trying to force onto this new person. I needed a name for her, a temporary name. I told myself, a placeholder, just for now. I thought of names I'd always liked, classic, simple names, names that felt right. And then, one just surfaced, floating up from some unknown part of my consciousness. It was soft, but with a hint of strength. It was pretty, but not frivolous. Marley, I said aloud. The name felt strange and perfect on my tongue. I looked at my reflection at her reflection. The woman in the silver dress with the short dark hair and scared eyes. She looked like a Marley. Hello. Marley, Amelia said softly from behind me. And for the first time, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a monster. I saw a beginning. The next few days were a blur. We made a decision. Amelia and I. If I was going to stop fighting my body, I had to stop fighting the world. I couldn't continue to show up at work as Western, a man who was visibly, rapidly, becoming a woman. It was unsustainable. The only alternative was for Western to disappear for a while. Medical leave, Amelia stated. All business indefinite, citing complications from the chemical exposure. It's not even a lie. And in his place, Marley Hale. Amelia continued, typing furiously on her laptop. She was creating a new identity. A temporary contract for a research assistant. Hale was my mother's maiden name. It's untraceable. You'll be my new assistant. Hired to help me manage Dr. Guesistonden's caseload while he's recovering. The plan was insane. It was also the only one we had. But to pull it off, I Marley needed an education. I had the body, more or less, but I had none of the skills. Amelia became my drill sergeant. Our training ground was my apartment, which we quickly transformed into a feminine boot camp. She started with the walk. You're walking from your shoulders. Like a man, she'd say, tapping my hip. Walk from here. Let your hips lead. It's about balance, not force. She had me walk back and forth across my living room in a pair of her old shoes' sensible block heels, only about 1.5 inches high. At first, I felt like a newborn foal, all wobbly ankles and jerky movements. But she was patient. Smaller steps. Let your arms swing naturally. Don't fight it. Then came the clothes. We went on a frantic, late-night shopping trip to a 24-hour department store in a town an hour away. The experience was surreal, under the harsh fluorescent lights. I was a nervous wreck, hiding behind Amelia as she pulled items from the racks. We need the basics, she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. Blouses, a couple of skirts, some comfortable dress pants, and the foundation. She led me to the lingerie department. I froze. The aisles were a forest of lace and silk in every color imaginable. I had never felt so out of place in my entire life. My face was burning. I can't, I mumbled. You have to, she said firmly, but not unkindly. You need the support. It will change how your clothes fit, how you stand, how you feel. Trust me. She helped me find my size, a process that was both clinical and mortifyingly intimate. We bought simple, unadorned bras in neutral colors and soft, comfortable underwear made of cotton and modal. The first time I put on a bra in the fitting room, the sensation was shocking. The band was snug around my ribcage, the straps a gentle pressure on my shoulders, and the cups. They lifted and held my sensitive chest, cradling the new weight. The constant aching was immediately lessened. The feeling was one of containment, of security. It felt correct. We bought a simple makeup kit, and Amelia taught me how to apply a light foundation to even out my skin tone, a bit of mascara to make my eyes look bigger, and a neutral gloss for my lips. She brought over a wig she'd ordered online, a simple, shoulder-length brown bob with soft bangs. The moment I put it on, the transformation was complete. The person looking back at me from the mirror was no longer a man in a dress. She was a woman. She was Marley. Walking into the research institute as Marley Hale was the single most terrifying experience of my life. Every nerve in my body was screaming. I was wearing a simple navy blue sheath dress, a beige cardigan, and the low-heeled shoes I'd been practicing in. My handbag felt alien and clumsy hanging from my shoulder. The gentle sway of the dress against my legs was a constant reminder of my new reality. Amelia introduced me to the team. Everyone, this is Marley Hale. She'll be my temporary assistant, helping us keep Project Chimera on track while Dr. Weston is on medical leave. The reactions were polite, professional. A few handshakes, my hand felt small and delicate in theirs, and some welcoming smiles. No one looked twice. No one seemed too suspicious. To them, I was just the new hire. The anonymity was a relief so profound it almost made my knees buckle. I spent the day in a state of hyper-awareness. I was conscious of how I sat, how I crossed my legs, the pitch of my voice when I answered a question. I was performing femininity, and it was exhausting. But there were also moments of unexpected pleasure. The blouse I wore was made of silk, and it felt wonderfully soft against my skin. The way the skirt moved when I walked felt liberating after months of restrictive trousers. I felt a new sense of my body in space, a grace I didn't know I possessed. The constant physical discomfort I had felt as Weston was gone. As Marley, in these clothes, my body was finally at peace. It felt like I had taken off a suit of armor I didn't even know I was wearing. The biggest change wasn't physical, it was social. As Weston, I had been respected, sometimes feared. I was the brilliant, somewhat aloof head of the project. People approached me with deference. As Marley, I was approachable. People smiled at me in the hallways. They made small talk by the coffee machine. They treated me with a warmth and friendliness that Weston had never inspired. About a week into my new role, I was at my new desk, which was situated just outside Amelia's office, when Ethan, one of the junior chemists, walked by. He paused for a moment. Ethan was a good guy, smart and earnest. "Hey, Marley," he said with a friendly smile. "I just wanted to say, that's a really nice dress. That color really suits you." I was wearing a simple forest green A-line dress. My mind went blank. No one, in my entire 34 years of life as a man, had ever complimented my clothing. I had no idea how to respond. A hot blush spread from my neck all the way to my ears. "Oh," I stammered, my voice coming out higher than I intended. Thank you. I got it on sale." He just grinned. "Well, good find. Have a good afternoon." He walked away, leaving me completely flustered, but underneath the embarrassment was a different feeling. A warm, fluttering sensation in my stomach that spread through my chest. It was a novel and strangely pleasant experience to be seen, to be noticed, not for my intellect or my authority, but just for me, for the way I looked. It was superficial, maybe, but it was also validating in a way I couldn't explain. My body, this new body that had been a source of so much fear and shame, had just been called nice. The compliment wasn't for a costume, it was for Marley. The days turned into weeks. The performance of being Marley started to feel less like a performance. I learned the rhythms of it. I learned how to modulate my voice without thinking, how to move in a way that felt natural. I even started to enjoy the small rituals, putting on my makeup in the morning, choosing an outfit, the light scent of the perfume Amelia had bought for me. The strangest moments were at night. I'd get home, close my apartment door, and the day would be over. I'd take off the wig, the unfamiliar weight of it lifting from my head. I'd wipe away the makeup with a soft cloth, and I'd look in the mirror. The face that stared back was Weston's, but it was starting to look like a mask. The features were mine, but they felt increasingly alien. The sharp jaw, the faint shadow of stubble I now had to shave twice a day, the short hair. This was the stranger now. This was the costume. One night, after a particularly good day at the lab where I'd made a small breakthrough on a data analysis problem, I stood in front of the mirror and saw Weston's tired face. For a moment, I tried to reconnect with him, to feel what it was like to be him. I tried to lower my voice, to stand the way he did, to summon his old confidence. Nothing happened. He was a ghost, a memory. A terrifying question echoed in the quiet of my apartment. Am I really becoming Marley? I placed a hand on my chest, over my heart. The skin was soft, the shape beneath it was round. I closed my eyes, and the answer came back. Not in words, but in a feeling of peace, a feeling of rightness. Maybe the question wasn't, am I becoming Marley? Maybe it was, have I been Marley all along? For 3 months, the fragile new world I had built with Amelia held strong. I settled into my role as Marley Hale, becoming a competent and well-liked fixture in the lab. My work thrived, freed from the constant physical and mental stress of being Weston. My mind was sharper, more focused. I was making connections in the Project Chimera data that I had missed before. Life had a rhythm, a strange and precarious new normal. But a secret as big as mine can't stay hidden forever. It just festers, waiting for the right conditions to explode. The catalyst was a routine data audit from the Institute's Oversight Board. They were a panel of grey-faced administrators and tenured scientists whose job was to ensure funding was being properly allocated and research was proceeding on schedule. They were bean counters. Mostly, but they were meticulous. And they found an anomaly. It was in Dr. Weston's medical files, the hormone panels that Amelia had been forced to submit to justify my extended medical leave, showed readings that were, to put it mildly, biologically impossible for a recovering male patient. They were the readings of a pregnant woman. An email arrived one Monday morning. It was addressed to Amelia, but I was copied on it. Subject: urgent data discrepancy in Project Chimera personnel file. My blood ran cold as I read it. The board had flagged the files. They noted a statistical improbability and requested a full in-person report from Dr. Amelia Reed and a current status update, also in person, from Dr. Weston Davies. The meeting was scheduled for Friday. I looked up from my screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Amelia was already standing in her office doorway, her face pale. She'd seen it. Too. They know something's wrong, I whispered, my voice barely audible. They don't know what, she corrected, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. They just know the numbers don't add up. They probably suspect we're falsifying medical records to extend your leave. Maybe to cover for a bigger failure in the project. The irony was crushing. They suspected fraud. And in a way, they were right. We had committed a massive deception. But the truth was infinitely more bizarre, more unbelievable than anything they could possibly imagine. We were cornered. If Weston didn't show up to that meeting, we'd be fired on the spot, and a full investigation would be launched. My career, my life's work, would be gone. Amelia's career would be destroyed right along with mine. But how could Weston possibly appear? The man they remembered no longer existed. He was a phantom, a collection of memories and ill-fitting clothes. I was Marley. Walking into that boardroom as Weston was as impossible as reversing time itself. The week crawled by in a haze of mounting panic. Every friendly good morning, Marley from a colleague felt like a twist of the knife. Every smile I returned felt like a lie. Ethan asked me if I was okay, telling me I looked pale. I muttered something about a headache, but the truth was, I felt like a fraud on the verge of being exposed. The life I had just started to build, the fragile sense of self I had so painstakingly assembled, was about to be shattered. Thursday night, the eve of the hearing. I was a wreck. Amelia and I had spent hours debating our options, running through impossible scenarios. None of them ended well. By 10 o'clock, we had given up. She went home, promising to pick me up in the morning, and I was left alone in my apartment with my fear. I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, my mind racing. Should I run? Disappear completely? It was a tempting thought, a coward's way out. But it would mean leaving everything and everyone behind. It would mean confirming the board's suspicions and ruining Amelia's life. I couldn't do that to her. I found myself in front of my closet. I slid the door open, my eyes scanning the clothes inside, the neat rows of blouses, the skirts and dresses hanging in a spectrum of subdued, professional colors. This was Marley's wardrobe. On the other side of the closet, shoved into a dusty corner, were the last remnants of Weston's clothes, a few pairs of pants and a shirt I hadn't had the heart to throw away. Could I do it? Could I put them back on? Could I bind my chest, deepen my voice, and pretend to be him for just a few hours? The thought made me feel physically ill. The idea of forcing my body back into that coarse, ill-fitting prison was repulsive. It would be a violation of something fundamental, a betrayal of the person I was finally, tentatively, starting to become. My eyes fell on a new addition to my wardrobe, an outfit I had bought for a presentation I was supposed to give. Next month, it was a suit, a woman's suit. A beautifully tailored black blazer and matching slim-fit trousers. It was powerful, elegant, and professional. On an impulse, I took it off the hanger. I slipped on the trousers. They fit perfectly, hugging my hips and falling in a clean line to my ankles. Then, I put on the blazer over the simple silk camisole I was wearing. I buttoned the single button at my waist. I turned to the mirror. The woman who looked back was not the frightened research assistant I had been for the last 3 months. She was someone new. The suit gave her an air of authority, of strength. The sharp lines of the blazer complemented the soft curves of her body. She looked poised, confident. She looked like a scientist. She looked like a leader. Could I go back to being Weston? The question floated in my mind as I stared at this powerful reflection. I lifted a hand and placed it flat against my chest. Over the gentle swell of my breast beneath the camisole and blazer, I could feel the steady, calm beat of my heart. The panic had subsided, replaced by a strange, quiet clarity. No. The answer came, clear and absolute. I can't, and I don't want to. I was not Weston pretending to be Marley. I was not a man in a woman's suit. I was Marley. And tomorrow, the board was going to meet her. The boardroom was on the top floor of the institute, a cold, intimidating space with a long mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city I couldn't appreciate. The members of the oversight board were already seated when Amelia and I arrived. 6 of them, 5 men and 1 woman, all of them older, dressed in somber, expensive suits. They looked like a panel of judges, which I suppose they were. They all looked up as we entered, and a flicker of confusion passed over their faces. They were expecting Dr. Amelia Reed and Dr. Weston Davies. What they got was Dr. Reed and a strange woman they didn't recognize. Dr. Reed, the chairman, a stern-faced man named Dr. Albright, said, "We were expecting Dr. Davies as well. His presence is not optional." Amelia took her seat, her hands folded calmly on the table in front of her. I remained standing. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I took a deep breath, the way Amelia had coached me to do in the car on the way over. I looked directly at Dr. Gothard Albright. I saw the impatience in his eyes, the dismissal. He saw me as an assistant, an unimportant variable. It was time to change the equation. I opened my mouth, and when I spoke, my voice was not the high, nervous voice of my first few weeks as Marley. It was calm, measured, and though it was a woman's voice, it held a note of the authority I had once wielded as Weston. Dr. Davies sends his apologies, but he is unable to be here, I said. The room was silent. I had their full attention now. My name is Dr. Marley Hale, and in a way, I am the result of the accident involving ES8. I am the reason for the anomalies in Dr. Davies's medical reports. A ripple of confused murmurs went through the room. Dr. Albright silenced them with a sharp look. He peered at me over his glasses. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. I'm not familiar with a Dr. Maguilan Hale in this institute, he said coldly, and I fail to see what you could possibly have to do with this. We are here to discuss a serious matter of potential research misconduct. I agree. The matter is serious, I replied, taking a step closer to the table. It's also unprecedented. You're looking for Dr. Weston Davies, in a very real, biological sense. You found her. I am Dr. Davies. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. 6 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, a mixture of disbelief, shock, and dawning comprehension on their faces. I saw one of them, a biologist named Dr. Bats Chen, lean forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his surprise. Before they could explode with questions or accusations, I began my story. Amelia had helped me prepare a presentation, a proper scientific report. I wasn't there to beg for their sympathy. I was there to present them with data. And I was the primary data point. On the date of the accident, I began, my voice steady. Dr. Weston Davies was exposed to a significant dermal and aerosolized dose of the ES8 compound. Our hypothesis was that it would be metabolized and flushed from the system with minimal side effects. That hypothesis, as the data now clearly shows, was incorrect. I walked them through it. Step by step, I talked about the accident, the initial hormonal shifts, the physical restructuring. I used the cold, detached language of a scientist describing an experiment. I referred to Weston in the third person, as the subject. The subject's endocrine system was completely rewritten, I explained, gesturing to the file in front of them. The board noted the extreme levels of estradiol. What followed was a rapid, involuntary process of feminization. We observed shifts in bone structure, fat redistribution, changes in vocal cord length, and the development of secondary female sex characteristics, including mammary glands. I laid it all out. The crisis of identity, the struggle with a body that no longer matched the subject's internal perception, and then, the adaptation. The subject, Weston Davies, could no longer function, I said, and for the first time, my voice softened. I let a bit of the personal journey through. His body was in revolt against his male presentation. To continue the work, and frankly, to survive psychologically, a new social and physical presentation was required. This led to the creation of the persona, Marley Hale. I looked each of them in the eye. I am not a lie or a deception. I am an outcome. I am the most unexpected, and perhaps the most revolutionary. Result of Project Chimera. The ES8 compound doesn't just treat symptoms, it fundamentally remodels the host's biology, according to a new hormonal blueprint. I am the living proof of concept. I finished by making my case. Project Chimera cannot be led by a ghost. Weston Davies is gone, for all practical purposes, but the scientist, the mind that conceived of this project, is still here. I am asking the board to officially recognize my new legal and professional identity as Dr. Marley Hale, and to allow me to continue my work as head of this project. The room was quiet for a long time after I finished. The board members looked at each other, at me, at the file in front of them. They were in shock. But they were also scientists. They understood data, and I had just presented them with the most compelling data of their careers. Dr. Albright finally cleared his throat. This is highly irregular. The situation is highly irregular, Dr. Chen countered, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated scientific awe. This isn't fraud. This is a breakthrough, a terrifying, accidental, human breakthrough. They asked Amelia and me to leave the room while they deliberated. We waited in the hallway, the silence stretching for what felt like an eternity. I leaned against the wall, my energy completely spent. Amelia stood beside me, and for a moment, she reached out and squeezed my hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. After 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. The door opened. Dr. Albright motioned for us to come back inside. His expression was unreadable. We took our seats. The board has reviewed the evidence you've presented, he began, choosing his words carefully. We have also reviewed the project's progress reports for the last 3 months, which have been filed under your supervision. Dr. Reed, but authored primarily by your new assistant. He looked at me. The progress you have made in that time is significant. In fact, it's more progress than the project has seen in the last year. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. A flicker of humanity breaking through his stern exterior. By a vote of 4-2, he said, the board has approved your request. Your temporary contract will be terminated. Miss Imhara Hale, and a new permanent contract will be issued for Dr. Marley Hale as the Director of Project Chimera, effective immediately. We will assist you with the necessary legal and administrative paperwork. He looked at me, a strange mix of disbelief and respect in his eyes. Welcome aboard, Dr. Hale. Now, don't ever let something like this happen again. Relief washed over me so completely that I felt lightheaded. I had done it. I hadn't just survived. I had won. 1 year later, I stood at a podium in a vast auditorium in Geneva. The lights were bright, the air thick with anticipation. Hundreds of the world's leading scientists, doctors, and bioethicists were looking up at me, their faces a sea of expectation. The woman at the podium bore little resemblance to the frightened creature in the silver dress, and even less to the man named Weston Davies. My brown hair, no longer a wig, was my own. It fell in a sleek, straight curtain just past my shoulders. I was wearing a charcoal grey dress with a sharp, modern cut, and a pair of elegant but sensible heels that I now walked in as if I'd been born in them. I was no longer performing. I was simply being. The ES8 compound, I said, my voice clear and confident, amplified by the microphone, was never intended for human transformation. Its purpose was regeneration. But as is so often the case in science, the most profound discoveries are not the ones we seek, but the ones that find us. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a complex molecular diagram. What the accident taught us is that the human body is far more mutable, more adaptable, than we ever imagined. The binary of male and female, which we treat as a biological absolute, is in fact a fluid spectrum, governed by a delicate chemical language. ES8 is simply a new, and profoundly eloquent, dialect of that language. For the next hour, I held them captive. I presented my research, my story, my life. I was no longer the subject of the experiment, I was its author. I had taken control of the narrative. There was no more Western. The name felt like a word from an ancient language, its meaning lost to time. He wasn't a ghost to be mourned, or a past to be ashamed of. He was simply the prologue to my story. He was the man who had to be broken so that I could be built. I no longer saw my transformation as a loss. I had lost a life that, in retrospect, had felt like a performance of its own, a rigid, emotionally constricted performance of masculinity. What I had gained was everything. I had gained a connection to my own body, an emotional honesty I'd never known. I had gained a new perspective, a new strength. I had gained myself. When I finished my presentation, the room was silent for a beat, and then it erupted in applause. It was thunderous, A wave of validation and acceptance that washed over me, warm and bright. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, and scanned the front row. Amelia was there, looking up at me. Her expression was one of intense pride, but there was something else in her eyes too, a warmth and an affection that went beyond professional respect. Our journey had bonded us in a way I couldn't quite define, creating a partnership that was the bedrock of my new life. She caught my eye and gave me a small, subtle nod. "You did it." As the applause continued, I looked out at the bright lights of the auditorium, at the blurry faces of the crowd. I thought back to that terrible, pivotal day in the lab, the smell of alcohol, the shattering glass, the icy sting of the chemical on my skin. It was the day Weston Davies's life ended. But it wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't a conclusion. I leaned toward the microphone one last time, my voice a soft, personal whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. "The accident," I said, "wasn't an ending. It was an invitation.